Have you ever picked up a book to read and the font was too small, or the spacing of the line or the words was too tight, and you just kind of put it away because it just looked like too much work to read? I have a copy of Wuthering Heights that I've never read for that exact reason. Sometimes book formatting can be a little wonky, and as an author, you may not understand how important it is to make your book easy to read. Today we're talking about some of the most common mistakes that I see in book formatting and some very simple ways to fix those formatting mistakes. Hello everyone, my name is Mandy Lynn. I'm an author, the creator of the Book Launchpreneur series, and I also have courses on book cover design and book formatting. I make weekly videos on the business of being an author here on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification icon so you never miss a new upload. You can also join as a YouTube member to get early access to my videos and get behind the scenes content. So let's talk book formatting. Just so you know, I've professionally formatted books for authors for a couple of years. I no longer do it because I don't have the time to work with freelance clients anymore, but I've worked with hundreds of authors formatting their books. And I've formatted all their books using Adobe InDesign. In my book formatting course, I teach you how to use Adobe InDesign to format your book for print and ebook, but Adobe InDesign is not the only book formatting software that you can use. I personally think it's the best book formatting software, but it's not the only software. Most authors prefer to use Microsoft Word, so a lot of the stuff I talk about today can be applied to Microsoft Word. Just know that it's probably going to be easier to do it in softwares like Adobe InDesign. Microsoft Word is great for writing your book, not great for formatting your book, but it can be done. If you do end up taking my course on Adobe InDesign, I actually have a template that you can download and basically import your book into to format your book. And in that template, I apply everything that we're about to talk about today. So you don't have to worry about it too much if you use my template, but it's always good to know. So let's dive into some of the mistakes. Mistake number one is font choice. I think authors tend to get really excited when it comes to formatting their book because it feels like something that is attainable. It's something that we can do easily. And sometimes when we're new at doing something, we want to show off that we know how to do a certain skill. And sometimes that showing off can be choosing a fun, cool font. But the body text of your book is not the place to do that. When it comes to fonts for your book, aka the actual content itself, we can do fancy fonts for your chapter headers, but for the body text, your book, you want it to be boring. You want it to be basic. Fonts like Times New Roman, I personally really like Book Antiqua, Georgia, all these fonts are really great. Anything else that doesn't look like a very standard font, you want to stay away from. The entire point of book formatting is making your book as easy to read as possible. And the fancier you try to make things, often the harder it makes the book to read. So when it comes to book formatting, truly less is more. And that applies to everything, but especially when it comes to your font choice. Which brings us to font size. Your body text should be between 10 to 12 points. In the book template that I have for my InDesign course, I use 11 points because it's in the middle. And then if you need to go up or down a little bit, you can. If you do anything smaller than 10 points, it can be hard to read. If you do anything larger than 12 points, I think it's considered large text at that point, which is like a little checkbox you click off when you're uploading your manuscript. And sometimes large text can just look a little unprofessional. It kind of makes it look like, hey, my book is short, so I made the text larger so it looks longer and like more legit book, and it's not always a great look. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, I've seen authors make their text smaller so they can reduce the number of pages because they have a really long manuscript. And there's certain things that you can do to reduce your page count in your book if you need to, but your font choice probably isn't one of the places where you want to do that because there does come a point where it just gets harder and harder to read your book. Which brings us to line spacing. So if you're in Microsoft Word, the recommended line spacing is 1.2 to 1.5, but the technical term for line spacing is your leading. This is the term that is used in Adobe InDesign. It's also used in any sort of formatting capacity, but in Microsoft Word, they just have it labeled as line spacing. Your leading, aka line spacing, should be 50% larger than whatever your point size of your font is. So if you have a 10-point font, then that means in theory that your leading should be 20 point. Now this is not a hard number, you can give or take on that 50%, so I personally really like 18-point spacing. I feel like that gives you enough spacing that it's easy to read, but not so much spacing that you're taking up more pages and therefore making your book more expensive to print. I will say if you're trying to reduce the page count of your book, leading is the way to reduce it. It's better to reduce your line spacing than your font size. Now let's talk about letter spacing, because this is probably the thing I modify the most when I'm formatting my books. The technical term for letter spacing is your tracking. Typically, you're not going to touch your tracking unless you're trying to modify things within your text to make things look better. And what type of things are you modifying? That is your widows and your orphans. A widow is the last line of a paragraph at the top of a new page, and an orphan is the first line of a paragraph at the bottom of a page. Now, not everyone cares about widows and orphans. It used to be a bigger thing that formatters would care about, especially when it came to reducing page count and saving on printing. Most people don't tend to care about widows and orphans. Sometimes it can break up reading, like if you start a new paragraph and the whole rest of the paragraph is on the next page, it can slow down your reading. It's up to you whether you really care about that or not. Personally, I only tend to take care of widows and orphans when it's one really short word rather than an entire line. If it's an entire line, I leave it. I don't care. If it's a very short singular word that's kind of left hanging, I feel like that tends to look a little odd, and I will clean it up if I can. And a lot of the times I clean it up is I highlight the entire paragraph and I reduce my tracking. Now, when you're doing this, you don't want to reduce your tracking more than 30% in either directions. So you can have it 30% higher or 30% lower, but higher than 40 or less than -40, it tends to be either too spaced out or too tight and hard to read. The next thing I want to talk about is the alignment of your book. Now, I feel like most people, especially people who read lots of books, understand that books are left justified, which means the entire paragraph stretches from page to page, except for the last line, which will be aligned to the left. Now, by default, Microsoft Word has everything just aligned to the left. So when you're formatting, you have to make sure you highlight your entire manuscript and make sure it's left justified. It just makes things look a lot cleaner, more professional, and way more satisfying to look at as well. And the last thing we'll talk about today, which is perhaps the trickiest thing to format, especially in Microsoft Word, is your headers and your footers. Now, your headers and footers can vary depending on what your personal taste is, also the genre of your book, but typically for novels, the header is at the top of the page. You have the title of the book and the author of the book, and at the bottom of the page, you have the page numbers. Now, sometimes in nonfiction, at the top of the page, rather than the title of the book, you have the chapter of that book, and it's a little bit more intensive to format because you're changing the header for each chapter, but you get the idea. And also the appearance of everything can look very different. You can have it either be all centered in terms of alignment, you can have it be justified either to the left or to the right of each page. There's a lot of flexibility when it comes to the headers and the footers, but the one thing that I always try to hammer home is that you should not have headers and sometimes also not have footers on the start of a new chapter. On the start of a new chapter, sometimes you'll have some chapter art where you just make it look pretty, and you definitely don't want the header at the start of your chapter. And then I personally also remove the footer because I just think it looks way cleaner to not have a header or a footer at the start of a new chapter, but you can keep the page count in if you want to, especially in a nonfiction book where you're going to have a table of contents where that page number will matter. You want to keep the footer in there. But 9 times out of 10, I tend to remove the header and the footer out of a new chapter page. Now, doing this in Microsoft Word involves creating a new section for every single chapter, and it's a kind of a messy process, but it is something you can accomplish. I actually have a decently old tutorial on YouTube on how I would do this when I was formatting my books in Microsoft Word, so if you want to watch that video, you can check it out. But again, it's a bit of a complicated process. In Adobe InDesign, it's actually a super simple process to remove headers and footers from your chapters, because essentially for the chapter pages, you design what's called a parent page, which is you kind of put in your headers and your footers into the parent page and you apply it to the entire book. And then as you go ahead and start really formatting your book, you find the pages where a new chapter starts and you apply a different parent page to that chapter, and that parent page doesn't have any headers and footers, and instead it might have a cool design for the chapter header that has some art that looks really great for the formatting. And then what's also great with Adobe InDesign is doing chapter header art like that is really simple and easy. And again, it's something you can do in Microsoft Word, but it's a lot more finicky and tends to be a little more time invasive. Anyways, I talk about the entire book formatting process and I explain parent pages a lot better in my course. Parent pages are essentially like a template that you create for yourself and then you apply it to your book as you're working. I very much enjoy the formatting process. I actually find it really relaxing, especially since I know how to use the software so well at this point. But if you want to learn more about how to format your book with Adobe InDesign, my course will be linked down below. Otherwise, that is it for this video. If there's any other common formatting mistakes that you see, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you all for the next video.